understanding the provenance of these large language models and the data that was used to train them and where these systems are coming from and how they are being developed is just as important to me as understanding what the possibility is of what they can achieve. I want to be able to understand if I'm relying on you because you're feeding me a potential outcome or you're analyzing information for me, I want to know why you're analyzing it in that way.
My guest today is Nick Andersen, a Marine Corps veteran turned national security leader who now leads Invictus International Consulting as president and COO. Getting his start as a systems engineer in the Marine Corps, working on communications and equipment, Nick has held CIO and CISO roles in government and private industry and has even advised the White House.
Nation states like China are pre-positioned in our critical infrastructure and they're waiting to exploit it at a time and place of their choosing because it's just phase zero operations for them. We need to be able to make sure that the president and the national security staff have the flexibility to be able to make the decisions that they need to make. You don't want to have somebody who's trying to make a decision saying, well, unconstrained, I would go do this, but if I do that, am I going to have major metropolitan areas that suddenly don't have power, or what's the economic impact going to be?
Nick has seen the challenges of information security from many vantage points and has insight on where we need our leadership to focus to meet the changing technological world.
Everything in the U.S. Especially is underpinned by all of these sort of fragile, interconnected sectors. It's all the things that just nobody thinks about day to day.
Our conversation covers AI, government policy, critical infrastructure, leadership, and the opportunities we have to get them all right. And now, here's Nick Andersen. Now we can jump right in by talking about your background, and maybe let's talk about where you are now. There's a great resume that we can go through of various government institutions, of your military service, but let's start with your latest title, because also I was noticing man of many titles. There's like CIO in there, there's analyst in there, there's engineer in there. Now there's president and COO of Invictus. Nick Andersen, tell us about it. What's the COO and president of Invictus?
Yeah, it's the worst presidential job ever. Yeah, nobody plays music when you walk in the room. No branded M&Ms or anything.
Nobody stands up.
Yeah, no, none of the perks whatsoever.
Just all the work.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I just essentially get a presidential branded shovel to go dig through all the crap I have to do on a daily basis. But I started out as a hands-on engineer in the Marine Corps, and I had a weird job field that I was in. It was sort of a jack of all trades job field. You had to be able to do field expedient antennas and SATCOM and radio battalion intercept technology.
So like a comms engineer?
It was a 2651 in the Marine Corps, which used to be called like a special intelligence communicator. Now they've changed it to something else, like an ISR engineer or something or another. But it was just sort of a jack of all trades. You had to be the server guy and the VoIP guy and the whatever else that's exactly.
So typical IT. Just got to figure it out.
Yep, just jack all trades IT guy. And that led to going to Germany and then going to MCIA, Marine Corps Intel Activity there in Quantico. And that was where I got out. I got medically separated. So off I went out into the real world.
And in the real world, you worked for the government in a couple roles, right? You were at the Coast Guard, Navy, and Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Held a couple CIO type jobs in that space.
Yeah. I'm government recidivist. I just can't stay away.
Tends to be the case. People, it's hard to get away from. It becomes sort of like what you know. But it's also pretty common that I see people finally make their escape, and it looks like you've done that. Tell me about Invictus.
Invictus is, we're everything from a full spectrum cyber solutions provider. We've got guys that are helping to do weapons and exploit development. We've got people that are doing enterprise IT work. We've got people that are doing a variety of intelligence missions, everything from traditional analysis and like economic analysis for supply chain threats, all the way to counterintelligence supporting nuclear command and control, sort of everything in between. Really, we just focus if it's the defense intel and cyber community, no matter what it is, as long as it's not admin and logistics work, and even a little bit of the logistics work we do, that's us. So we've got a bunch of people, primarily in Colorado Springs and here in the DC area. But it's just a great organization. It came together as a group of veterans that wanted to build a company that can actually make a substantive difference and grow in sort of an organic way. And it's just been highly successful in the defense intel community. So we're about about 350 people now, and continuing to grow every single day. It's really cool just to be able to see all the different types of things that folks in our company get up to and the missions they get to touch.
I think a couple of the key words in there that I love to hear from people that are running businesses: substantive, organic, especially in the contracting space and selling services to the government.
Yeah.
Maybe controversial opinion, but I don't think anyone would disagree with it. A lot of times there's fluff and there's not a lot of substance to what the government procures or what they're sold and what ends up actually being there. Yeah. Do you see a lot of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're very intentional about avoiding that type of thing. I mean, if there's something where we think we're getting a price shootout to go to the bottom with somebody, we're just not going to touch it. We're not all about
don't
that.
Don't participate in the race to the bottom.
No, and just to be honest, we don't think it's fair to even the people that we're going to bring into our company. We want to be able to pay them well, where they're not going to have to, 6 months from now go, well, I've had XYZ thing happen in my life, or, we're pregnant, or we're planning for a kid, or whatever else. I need to go look for another job that's going to pay me better. We want to be able to invest in people over the long term and educate them and help with their professional development and give them senior folks that they work with in their job field that can help mentor them, and we want to compensate them well. But we think being able to bring those types of people allows us to actually shape the mission collaboratively with the government in a substantive way, rather than just saying, okay, who's the cheapest person I can get that'll technically get a
who's
clearance,
the warmest body
and
I can put in the
stick
seat.
them right here for 8 hours a day until somebody says they suck, get them out of here.
Yeah, no, I definitely see a lot of that. For better or worse, you see a lot of roles where they're clearly just looking for a body in a seat.
Yeah.
And so there's that competition race to the bottom. Progressive viewpoint for a company to prioritize all those things you were just talking about, of you're actually developing them, treating them as people, putting them in conditions where their lives can be served and not just the revenue for the company.
Well, I don't think it's very fair to the people that are in these roles either. I mean, who wants to go to work and just sit there and slowly engage in soul-sucking activity, feeling like you're contributing absolutely nothing other than getting a paycheck out of it? I mean, it's not very satisfying work. So it's been really good for us. And like I said, that smaller focused relationship that we get to have, it allows us to help sort of talk about, and this is going to sound a little salesy, but kind of talk about the art of the possible with the customer. Just say, look, we understand this problem and we've been working on this problem too, and we were just curious and kind of poking around. What do you think about taking this approach instead? So we'll take internal R&D money and invest it and build up solutions in some back room, with random stuff we threw together in a server rack, and say, we think this is really cool. Like we've got a ML technology we're using right now to help automate some of our vulnerability research that we're doing, for customers in the offensive cyberspace. And that's just something we did because our guys were interested in it. There was no customer requirement for it. This was not a contract thing. It was just, we had guys that were interested in it. We're like, yeah, that does sound really interesting.
Good things happen when you chase passion.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
We, so my company, Sentinel Blue, we try as much as we can to prioritize, and sometimes I talk about it and say we're a little reckless financially, because sometimes we throw money at something where it's like, that's not going to have any felt impact for the customer. It's not something being immediately demanded, but we're like, that seems interesting. It's tangentially related. It might make us better at what we do at some level, very indirectly. Yeah. But frankly, it just seems fun. Like, let's spin that up. Let's try that solution or try out that tool or whatever. Yeah. Throw some money at it. Doesn't always have to have a direct return.
No, I mean, it's, like I said, if we're looking at it and saying, yeah, this is interesting and we think it's going to benefit our folks in the long term, just helping them to grow and kind of keeping them curious, about the field. And again, it's boring for us too if we feel like we're just in a company that's just punching the clock. Yeah. Supporting something, no matter what part of the company it is. So, yeah, no, I agree with you.
There's this narrative now. Well, I guess it's always been a narrative of the government and people that work there. But you have the big campaign of DOGE, the government efficiency, and there's a portrait that has been painted of everyone that works for the government or government adjacent are doing exactly that. We're just putting people in soul-sucking jobs to press a button. Now I've found in a career that has touched many defense contractors and all kinds of places, largely in the DoD space, but in the broader federal space. I see lots of passionate people working hard, trying to solve pretty big problems, certainly have some areas of efficiency, but I don't think it's fairly painted as, that as soul sucking, just pressing buttons, right?
Yeah. I mean,
you've been in government,
yeah,
and you've seen it.
I have. Yep. And I gotta tell you, I'm not, even as a person who's working in the government contracting space, I'm not worried about Doge at all. Yeah, we think it's great. I mean, our company is in the middle of doing things with our customers right now. We're on probably half of our contracts. We're growing right now. We're getting contract mods like right now, like this week, getting contract mods to grow and bring on more staff because we're doing tangible hands-on things and we're able to deliver high-end talent that's able to make a difference with whatever the government mission is. A lot of people started hitting the panic button in the government contracting community. It's like, I think it was May 27th or so when the SecDef signed a memo saying no more enterprise IT contracts. If you're going to bring something forward, SecDef's got to sign off on it, and you better have a really good business case for why nobody else in DoD can do this for you. I was like, yeah, that seems logical to me. Why would we be worried? But if we are delivering a really good, high quality service inside of an agency within DoD, then we're helping them to become one of the DoD agencies that can help provide that service at an enterprise level and can help provide an efficiency to the government. So I'm just like, no, this is great. Are you kidding me? Because we're crushing it, and all these guys suck over here. So they're going to be the ones that take it in the shorts. This is a great opportunity for us.
Do you think that's unique to the intelligence community, where you guys spend a lot of your time? Like, are they just a better, more, I won't say better customer, but maybe more long-term thinking, more strategic thinking than some other agencies might be?
I wouldn't say necessarily. I mean, I think federal civilian agencies have obviously, you can see it publicly. They've obviously been hit a little bit harder on the Doge front, but I think that's because it's a lot easier to look at them as sort of a common point across all federal civilian agencies and say, you've all got things in common that you need to be doing. It's going to be a lot easier to combine some of those services. I think the Intel community is just, through all of its iterations of future state DOTAS things that they were thinking about, and the eyesight thing, the IC IT enterprise program, from years ago. I think the IC has naturally started to look at solutions in the past of where can they come together as a community and where can they do things strategically and where do they need to uniquely invest because the mission capability requires them to deliver something that's unique. So I just think the IC is, over the last couple of decades, has naturally been doing some of that work. And I don't think it's necessarily because they want to be more collaborative, because everybody kind of does naturally fall back within your own.
A little bit of kingdom building that happens there.
Absolutely. But there's finite resources, and I think everybody agrees they'd much rather spend $1 on mission than spend $1 on something that's that's infrastructure support.
I really want to explore your background with the Department of Energy. It's one of those. So the DoD is a big political cudgel of sorts. Like, it's on everyone's mind, and we're all aware of their budget and all that sort of stuff. Then there's federal departments that get less interest than maybe they should, based on their mission, but also what's in their purview that people don't realize. Like the Department of Energy, nuclear is under the DOE's purview, and my understanding is like our nuclear weaponry is at some level under the DOE.
Yeah. I mean, the DoD operates the nuclear weapons. Energy is the place where the nuclear stockpile and the weapons stockpile is being maintained, and all that's through the NNSA. The NNSA component of DOE is what's managing all of those those national labs that have that sort of a structure. And then you got the Office of Science, and they're maintaining a lab structure as well, because there's weapons focused labs or science focused labs. And all of those individual elements, whether it's it's Sandia or Argonne or Idaho National Labs or wherever, I mean, each one of those has resources that are being used, well beyond just the federal government, but all around a lot of different components. In energy, in particular, and that was where we had to focus. You have to focus on the energy sector writ large. So when I was working there, I was part of a new office that we stood up called CSER. It was cybersecurity, energy security, and emergency response. So it's really bringing together physical response for things like, a hurricane takes out your lights, or a cyber incident. Because I was sort of looking soup to nuts. Something goes bad, and it goes bad with energy. This is the office supposed to be coordinating with industry. and working with them. The energy sector is really, really broad. I mean, you've got everything from the renewables and the guys that are rolling out technology, like solar and wind and hydro and everything else. You've got traditional players on the electricity side, everything from the uber large companies like Dominion and Duke
Who's
and
CISO
Southern.
we had on? Sean Stalzer. Great dude.
Really?
He came on, it was a couple episodes ago.
Oh, yeah,
we had a really good deep dive conversation. And he, like so many of the episodes that we've had, some of the guests we've had, illuminated a lot of areas that you kind of just take for granted, like the energy sector and what a target it poses. So I'm glad to hear that at the DOE level, you guys have initiatives on cybersecurity, because all I've been hearing, the last several years is as a critical infrastructure sector, it's fairly vulnerable, or can be.
Yeah, well, I mean, it absolutely is. I mean, it still is. It's because it's such a community of haves and have-nots, because you'll have one of the uber large electricity companies. You're also going to have what I'll call the mom and pop shops, local electric cooperative, where people are wearing many different hats, and hopefully, but maybe not, they have a dedicated cybersecurity personnel and staff. You look at a lot of our nation's critical infrastructure that is out there. There are a lot of critical things either for our economy or for our defense mechanisms that are all underpinned by local electric cooperatives. I mean, these are owned and operated by the communities that they're in. These are not, big for-profit entities with lots and lots of resources.
Right.
We got public power districts like Omaha. Omaha has, Stricom, right there. That's a pretty big, piece of it. Hawaii Electric Cooperative. We've obviously got a lot with Indo-Pacom, right over there. And, and that's a pretty big, entity. Those are electric cooperatives and public power districts that are a critical piece of our infrastructure. And so but when you look at that, and then you look at the sort of intricate network that has to be maintained of pipeline infrastructure and how energy is getting moved, when you look at things like natural gas infrastructure, I mean, that's feeding a lot of our electric infrastructure that is going into generation, that is then going down to, transmission and distribution and making it into somebody's house or their business. Because when we start thinking about longer term resilience planning, a lot of people, whether it's in the exercises community or, risk owners or whoever, a lot of people still have trouble thinking about, what am I going to do when I don't have the thing that I just assume that I'm going to have? Sure. So you see a lot of emergency response plans where people are like, oh, okay, you're going to pick up the phone and you're going to call this number. Yeah. And on this call bridge, we're going to coordinate X, Y, Z. Well, what if you don't have access to the cell tower?
Right.
What if we go and flip the lights on in your EOC and the lights don't come on? Do you have a backup generator? If you've got a backup generator, then do you have a fuel delivery contract, or is that a natural gas pipe that's feeding it? Or, just how far
all these different layers you got to peel back.
Yeah. And it's just all of our critical infrastructure is exactly, it's all the things that just nobody thinks about day to day. They just expect they can go walk into 7-Eleven and get their Monster and pay for it with their credit card or whatever. I mean, if the payment systems went down, how many people do you think are carrying around, boatloads of cash with them?
I haven't seen cash in years.
That's what I'm saying. So, I mean, if you even just go, how many people even have enough cash in their pockets to go off and do a trip to the grocery store?
Right.
Yeah. Probably not a lot. There's just everything in the, the U.S. Especially, and in many of these highly developed countries, is underpinned by all of these sort of fragile, interconnected sectors. It's really interesting and really scary to look at all at the same time.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming too. So I love the phrase I heard a long time ago, and I've said it several times throughout our episodes, that society is only ever 3 meals away from total collapse.
Yeah.
You think about all the underpinning things that have to be functional for you to be able to go to the grocery store.
Yep.
And just take that food out with you. I mean, there's payment systems, there's energy, there's infrastructure for you to get there.
Yep.
There's, water systems and everything. When you peel those layers back and you look at all these different things like energy, water, and you see how vulnerable they are, it can be overwhelming where you're like, wait, what? Like a foreign adversary can interrupt the water supply? How does that even work?
Yeah.
And it can feel like a pretty big uphill challenge that we have.
Yeah. Well, and the adversaries inside the wire, Maybe it's but absolutely 100%. And nation states like China are pre-positioned in our critical infrastructure, and they're waiting to exploit it at a time and place of their choosing, because it's just phase zero operations for them. They're pre-positioning for the possibility of war, or for being able to push us to make national security decisions that we don't want to make. Everybody spends a lot of time talking about Taiwan and the Taiwan scenario. So hypothetically, if China decides to cross the straits in 18 months, we need to be able to make sure that the president and the national security staff have the flexibility to be able to make the decisions that they need to make. You don't want to have somebody who's trying to make a decision saying, well, unconstrained, I would go do this, and this would be, I think, in the national security best interest of the United States. But if I do that, am I going to have major metropolitan areas that suddenly don't have power? Am I going to have people who can't get water? Am I going to have people who can't X, Y, Z, whatever? What's the economic impact going to be? If you just take electricity, there are tons of water systems that will rely on pumps functioning, which means they need electricity.
Right.
You're going to go to the grocery store example, freezers and refrigeration.
Yep.
You're going to need electricity. You're going to need it for your payment processing systems. You're going to need it for people just to see where they're going in the grocery store, or even the doors. For a lot of the doors that automatically open, you need power for that. It's not just happening by magic. So that's just a single independent critical infrastructure sector. So it's when you start to think about the scope and scale, it can get a little overwhelming to think about the possibilities of what could happen. But I think we owe it to the people that we serve, whether it's on the public sector side and you're thinking about citizen services, or on the private sector side, you're thinking about your stakeholders that are your customers and your stockholders. We sort of owe it to those people to start thinking about what are we going to do when the worst happens, and where's that right balance between being a crazy person and having that bomb shelter in your backyard and
having the tinfoil hat.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That said, I think, and I don't think this is what you mean, but we're past the time of thinking, right? Everyone I talk to, and we're on the cyberspace, so we all kind of get it. And I think we have a bias maybe, where we already are like, hey guys, the adversary's here. And everyone from industry and in government, we all seem to recognize this and recognize that it's dire.
Yep.
But I've been having this conversation for 5 years at least, and I know I was late to the conversation.
Yep.
This conversation goes way back, but it just doesn't feel like enough's happening.
Yep.
And I don't know exactly what to attribute that to. There's a number of areas where the public demand isn't there to give the politicians the political capital to take action on it. I don't know what it's going to take. Are we doing enough, or what more can we do? Should we be doing?
No, but we're definitely not doing enough. I think it's a couple different things. It's when you look at one of those public power entities, or like a local electric co-op or whatever. We'll take public power, or even just highly regulated, energy sector entities. They're generally public utility commissions of some sort in every single state. And they are there to regulate entities like telecommunications and energy. If I'm a large energy provider and I say I've got a big capital program I want to invest in, and by doing these 3 things, it's going to make me more resilient, they have to be able to justify that investment going into their rate base to say, yes, grandma is going to have to pay $5 more a month on her power bill, and she is budget constrained, as a retiree. Is this going to be worth it to the community for me to invest in this sort of level of long-term resilience? That's part A. Part B, I think, is just everybody's scared to hurt somebody's feelings. And it's, we want to peanut butter spread everything across and say every critical infrastructure sector is important. Every segment.
If everything's critical, it's all.
Exactly. The nothing is. It's just, I think the time has come to be able to say, look, there are things that are more important than others. Me being able to have a black start capability on the grid to say a bad day has happened, infrastructure has been affected. I need to make sure I'm prioritizing my capability to bring that up. Yeah, that's probably more important than individual power supply to an individual building that's performing an individual function, because I'm talking about much broader scope of work. But I think people have been hesitant to look somebody in the eyes and say, I'm sorry, but you're less important than your neighbor down the street.
Yeah,
It's for
never
these
a
reasons.
winning strategy when it comes to like getting votes and support. And
No.
like, well, listen, here's the tough medicine to swallow.
Yep.
Right. Because there's almost always somebody else willing to say, you don't have to swallow that tough medicine.
Yep. Or people want to have an exceedingly long lead time to say, yes, we've got a 10-year window to solve that
Right.
problem. Let's just take the water sector as an example. I mean, Oldsmar happened, I don't even know how many years ago. I don't know, it was 3-4 years ago. I have no idea. But, Tampa is affected. It's affected in the lead up to the Super Bowl while there's an NSSE going on and there's tons of federal staff around. I don't think we've seen a ton of progress to say that the water sector is a whole lot more secure in cyberspace today than it was several years ago.
Which is super concerning. Now, again, I recognize we're in the cybersecurity domain, right? And I imagine in every domain, whatever industry, you feel like your industry is the most important.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah. Natural bias, for sure.
I'm sure the finance people are like, fine, we need to solve big financial problems. I get that.
Yeah.
But water is critical to life. You can only go a couple days at best without it. You really don't want to go that far without it. Several years removed from that level of problem, you would have hoped that everyone that should have been a crossing of the Rubicon moment. Yep. Like, hey, this is bad. We're very vulnerable, and water is very important to my way of life and our way of life collectively. I would have hoped that there would have been dramatic change, not just subtle, hey, we're getting a little more secure, and now we've got CISA looking at it. I would have wanted a task force, like at the highest level, to pay attention. We have critical infrastructure to get water into the homes of Americans. It's under threat. The adversary can, at will, generally disrupt somewhere in the United States somebody's water if they want and if it's politically expedient for them to do so. And they have demonstrated they will. How is it not an emergent threat on the level of something more kinetic, I guess?
Well, I just think all of those other things are much more tangible, I think, for folks to be able to say, like, yes,
they have to be able to hold it to believe it.
Yes. Like you see something bad happens, and because something bad happens, I need bollards in front of my building to prevent, a truck from ramming the front door or whatever. Those are tangible, measurable things where people can look at it and say, yes, I'm more secure because of this. And here was this kinetic thing that happened in the real world that we know is real. I mean, it's just cyberspace. It's so much more. It's a theoretical threat in people's minds, and they're not seeing the tangible payoff of, oh, well, because I invested in this, XYZ didn't happen. No, that's the point. You invested in this, so that didn't happen.
Right.
I just think it's
something in the human psychology about that, maybe.
Yeah, and it's you would have expected, yes, a major incident like that, like a Colonial or Oldsmar or wherever else, you would have expected people to sort of rise to the occasion. And I think we had a lot of people that want to. This is not to say people have not been trying their best and people haven't been out there carrying this torch and haven't been providing recommendations to the community. It's just we haven't had that sort of bias for action for, okay, so who's going to go do something about this? Show me how your infrastructure has been invested in to make you more resilient and recoverable, because something bad's going to happen. It doesn't matter. It's just, yeah, exactly. So if your basement's going to get flooded, okay, like, do you have a sump pump? Do you have a backup battery pump to go with it? Do you at least have a big bucket or a shop vac or something you can use to suck up the wake? Whatever. Come up with your own resilience planning. People do resilience plan every single day in their own lives. It's okay, I left the house. Maybe I get a flat tire. Do I have a spare? Do I have a pump? Do I have fixed flat in my car? Do I have AAA and I'm just going to call somebody? Do I have a friend or family member I'm going to call to help me with this? We just don't do that same sort of thing when it comes to our critical infrastructure. And it's because it's expensive. It's because it's hard to justify, because nobody wants to be the one that says grandma's going to have to pay $5 a month or more for
It's like power. Nobody's life gets tangibly better. It just prevents their life from getting worse. Mm-hmm. Which it's all very hard upsell. And then on top of that, I think we have the challenge that cybersecurity and IT are fairly esoteric already to the public, where they're kind of like, wait, you want to spend millions of dollars on what now? On ones and zeros? And like, well, yeah, at the end of the day, kind of.
Well, it always gets looked at as a luxury. This isn't traditional emergency response where it's like, oh, okay, community X has been affected. There's been a hurricane. We need to get water bottles, down there or whatever. Yep. That's a tangible real world thing. People can say, yes, there's a hurricane. They don't have clean drinking water. Federal government needs to help get water bottles down there, coordinate with the state and locals. IT is just IT. People just look at it and go, oh, okay, you're not going to have email on your, on your phone or, whatever it is. You're not going to be able to use Apple Pay when you go. People just don't see the systemic interconnected risk that is present when some of these things start to not work. And I think we've just done a really poor job of explaining it to the public. We spend an awful lot of time talking about it within our community.
Yeah.
Within our community.
That's the thing. There's like this disconnect.
That's the thing. People can preach all day inside of our community and recognize that there's a problem. But it's just, we haven't been able to reach the public yet. And if we have, we've done things like going to elementary schools and doing some sort of very sort of junior, hey, there's a threat, make sure you have a secure password, which is great. Like that's important. Kids need to know, and growing up in a digital era, use multi-factor authentication, change your password, so forth and so on. But we're not talking about how these things can affect us in our everyday lives. It's firefighters show up to a school and they're handing out things, flyers about, hey, make sure you've got XYZ things set up. Make sure you've got
smoke detectors.
Smoke detectors. Make sure you've got a rally point for you and your family if you have to, escape, go to a certain point or whatever. There's not that same thing for cyber, and people don't think about it. And even just for the broader critical infrastructure community, because I don't think we're going to be able to make the sell for cyber. It's going to be for critical infrastructure and what those services mean going away. Cyber just happens to be the threat vector that we're trying to mitigate that risk.
It's bringing awareness to what people already take for granted, and firefighting is a good example. So outside of my cybersecurity career, I'm a paramedic, and I've been at times I was a firefighter. But we just had out where I run, and I won't name it. We just went through an IT system upgrade at the dispatch level, and boy, did that not go well. And that had a real operational impact. So today, when you're on duty, you're on staff, we have an app that you get notification to your phone, and we get them to iPads or whatever else, tablets in our ambulances and whatnot. Address, call details, where we're going, how to get there, all that sort of stuff. When that system was down, we have to revert back to radios. Now, every 911 call was still answered. An ambulance still got to whoever needed it, but slowed us down. Not to say we've gotten over reliant on these things, but hey, an address transmitted in text where you can press a button and say, map, take me. A lot easier than trying to get an address transmitted over radio where radios are already not super clear. Then you have to write it down, look it up in a different app and all that sort of stuff. These small things, and that's a very small scale, but that's an IT system failure that has an operational impact that might mean the difference between a minute. But when you're in a scenario where you need an ambulance, sometimes a minute is a difference between life and death.
Yeah.
And that can have that impact. Now imagine that writ large at a large scale. You're in a major area during a major disaster, and there's been no resiliency planning for communications, for getting boots on the ground. Because the other thing, people don't think about, hurricane hits an area. Yeah, we can send a lot of boots and vehicles and whatnot, but that's not useful unless there's phenomenal coordination and incident command level stuff. Well, how are they going to communicate? How are you going to know which ambulance is where, which crew is where, who's got this area of responsibility? You need systems, you need communications capability. And if the areas don't have it, they tend to perform poorly in those responses.
And I think that's a point that a couple of folks in the cyber community have, I think, tried to make the last several years, especially with like ICS for ICS, ICS being incident command structure for industrial control systems, because the traditional physical response structure has that sort of command structure in place. Like okay, it's a three alarm fire. Paramedics or your EMT is going to show up on scene. There's going to be multiple trucks from multiple stations. There's going to be whatever other local responders. Even in that somewhat localized scenario, somebody's acting as the incident commander. Maybe you're not walking around going, oh, who's the incident commander? Maybe it's just the lieutenant or captain from whatever station that first got there. But that's how it's structured, and that's how people within a certain community expect things to be able to operate. We don't have that. we don't have that same sort of structure. And we've allowed, I think, a lot of the things, just societally to devolve to the point where we don't necessarily even have the knowledge to be able to do things like that anymore. I mean, this is why I think it's the Naval Academy is starting to teach celestial navigation again. They took it out of the curriculum for a while because, you got to be able to plan we got to be able to plan for systems failure. It's like before I went in the Marine Corps, I was the general manager of a Domino's pizza, and you needed to know, to be a good driver, to be able to drive quickly and get good tips, you needed to be able to know, the map of the city by heart. We had a huge map on the wall, and, we would just know, okay, I need to get to X area. I'm going to, pop down here, look for this, this point of interest. That's going to point me to like this grid square on the map. And here's how I'm going to plot out these 5 different deliveries I'm taking all at the same time to take the most efficient route. This is way before Waze and Google Maps on the phone and whatever else.
Maybe in the MapQuest days.
This is like, this is MapQuest. You could print directions if you needed to, but this is trying to deliver pizzas on the fly. We don't have that same sort of skill set now. My family is from South Carolina. They came up here and visited a couple weeks ago, and they were just sort of marveling because everywhere we went, I was pulling up Waze and using it. And I told them, it's like, well, it's not that I don't know how to get to Alexandria because that's where my work is. I drive there every day. I know 4 different ways to get to Alexandria, but I don't know if there's a wreck on 95 or if there's
intel.
Exactly. I want that live intel to be able to do it. It was just baffling to them, because for them, it's the town that my family is from. It's a couple of stoplights in the town, and that's about it. The biggest backup is trying to cross the road to go from the IGA to the Dollar General across the street. So it's very, very different sort of tools and techniques that we use to exist within this world. And critical infrastructure, I think, shifts depending on society and what society's expectations are at the time. Connectivity at home. We kept having all these like remote broadband conversations, but connectivity at home became a huge thing, during COVID and COVID response. Suddenly Zoom is critical infrastructure. Okay, well, 6 months before COVID, would anybody have said Zoom is critical infrastructure?
Right.
No, it's an IT tool that you use. It's not critical infrastructure. Well, now this is how the government's working. This is how the business is running. This is how our economies can
operate over Zoom.
Absolutely.
The whole judiciary.
Yeah. My favorite one is still the guy who actually shows up at the cat filter.
That's right.
At court. I promise I'm not a cat. Yeah, it's
that poor guy. I'd be so embarrassed.
But it's just sort of evolutionary. The evolution of how our society acts day to day has sort of led us to the point where, like, okay, this is getting really, really serious. Before we would have had things like fire hydrant infrastructure, and saying, okay, having fully interconnected fire hydrant infrastructure tied in with the water system, testing it regularly, maybe that would have been the extent of what we're looking at, or our rail system. Things traditional physical elements within our society now. There's just so many different elements, and it changes so quickly.
Yeah.
Like I said, we have to be able to look at longer term resilience planning, but in my mind, we've got to be able to just say, here's the cut line, and I'm sorry, but above this line is way more important than below this line. We're going to invest as much as we can here between DHS and CISA and DOD and energy or EPA or whatever sector lines up, plus the private sector, to say, in a bad day, we're going to make sure this is more resilient. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to invest over here. Or maybe I'm going to say, I'm not directly investing in the healthcare sector. But you know what I'm going to invest in? I'm going to invest in communications and in power and in water and in everything else.
You'll still net benefit.
Exactly. That's going to result from it, and say, when you can rely on, you're absolutely going to have power, you're absolutely going to have water, you're absolutely going to be able to communicate, then the healthcare system is going to be more secure and it's going to operate more effectively. We have to be willing to make decisions that are going to make a lot of people angry. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of those examples you bring up, like, railroads or fire hydrants. One of the things that I did a handful of times is go on like a fire inspection to like a school or whatever. And you have to check, hey, the things can't be this close to the drop ceiling. There has to be a certain amount of distance for sprinklers and all this sort of stuff. Pretty regulated. Cyberspace, very much not. And really has a major concern, which I understand the privacy side of things. Anytime there's regulation trying to come for cyberspace, which is functionally the internet, you have a big pushback because people really don't want the government highly regulating, certainly don't want them intercepting and looking at communications, though, of course they do. So they can't come in and do what they would otherwise do in critical infrastructure in some cases, or there's like a cultural skepticism and pushback to that. But at the same time, it seems like this is a problem that government does have to solve through regulation, because the industry is not doing it of their own volition. Industry is making the decisions that they need to make to be the most profitable. That's their responsibility. So they'll do just enough where they think they've bought down the risk enough, but they're not going to do anything above and beyond that. And then, as you were talking about these mom and pop style, say, energy providers who don't have the resourcing that a mega firm does. They can't put together a cybersecurity task force and team. They do just enough that they can be online and stay online.
Yeah.
And unless someone comes in with resources and, at some level a stick to get action.
Well, I mean, I think the government has to be sort of the responsible one in the room to be able to say, okay, great. You are looking at your risk within this individual sector because you are delivering to these people. Same with this company, same with this company, same with this company. None of those people potentially are looking across the board and saying, but what about the interconnected, risk here, and how if I'll stick with with electricity or with the energy sector in general. If I lose electricity, how is it going to affect that dispatch center? If I lose electricity, how is it going to affect whatever it is? Maybe I've got a wireless speaker system that we're using to be able to distribute information in this particular facility. I think the role of government is to say, you all are trying your best, allegedly.
Dubious proposition, to say the least.
But we have to step in and say, this is what we expect of you as a whole, because so much of society's risk is being underpinned by these different sectors. I mean, if government's not going to do that, who in the world is? I mean, there's no industry consortium that's going to be able to independently come up with a solution and say, this is it, invest this level of resilience, and we're calling it all good.
Is this the mandate of CISA? This kind of their ballpark? To be that centerpiece of all that?
Yeah, I mean, CISA has a strong remit to be able to look at systemic risk, for the nation.
Do they have the authority to action it? And maybe more importantly and more controversially, are they doing enough?
No, they're not. They're not doing it. CISA's not doing enough right now, and it's not that CISA doesn't have the people or the tools or the technology to be able to do it. It's just, again, I think their attention's been spread so thin in so many different ways that I think has drifted off of core mission. CISA, I'm going to mix weird analogies here, but it's just sort of become this Christmas tree agency. Every time there's a problem, no matter what it is, we're just going to go hang it on CISA. It's at some point, they become Mikey from the old cereal commercial. Give it to Mikey. Mikey will eat anything. He'll try it. Give it to CISA.
Sort of the catch-all.
Yeah.
We don't know what else to do with this. CISA.
That's what I'm saying. So now you've got this poor agency that has to focus on all of these different things because there's some pet project or pet risk that, legislator X had or executive branch leader Y had, and it leaves them fairly distracted. So I think it is within CISA's remit. I just think somebody's going to have to start making some tough decisions to be able to say, this is it. This is where we're focusing. We have to whittle down what we're doing so we can make measurable, demonstrable progress over the next several years and then continue to build upon that. It was like I said, I think that we've just done this peanut butter spread approach of nobody wants to look at anybody else and say, sorry, you're not important, which you're important like you are. We love you. But this is a little bit more important.
Right.
Because
to be practical.
Well, because I think the financial sector understands if I'm going to say, hey, energy is really important, I need to go help shore up energy, because without that, the financial sector isn't going to be able to do payment processing or whatever else they're going to need to do.
Your millisecond trades that you rely on don't happen.
Yep, absolutely. But yeah, I think this is definitely within CIS's remit.
So you're saying a number of times, I think a theme coming through here is that that need for tough decisions to be made, and some ranking priority of where to pay attention. Now, if I had the power to give you that authority, let's get into some hypothetical. Where would you place the priority today?
So I agree with you. Ruthlessly prioritizing is what we have to be able to do. I think if it's me, I would want to probably rely on some of the analysis that's already been done, because I think if you hand somebody a project, their natural tendency is, well, let's go analyze the problem, fully scope it out, define it. We've studied things to death. We have data that I'm sure that we can rely on. But I think I'd want to look at, where is our national economy most dependent, and then where's our defense critical infrastructure most dependent, and then what are those overlaps? Now, can I identify key zones or key elements to be able to say, this energy corridor, I need this energy corridor to absolutely continue to exist. I need to be able to absolutely continue to operate because it's supporting this thing, this thing, this thing. Without those, I'm going to have major economic impacts or national security impacts or public health and safety impacts. If it's me, I take an arbitrary number of those that I think we've got enough resources to be able to accomplish and say, that's it. We're going to scope this out, and we're going to ruthlessly prioritize and ruthlessly invest to be able to have greater resilience within those segments. And once we can prove that they are more resilient, and we can go through some actual black sky exercises and say, in the worst possible day, they are more easily recoverable in a rapid fashion to be able to support what they need to support, then we can move on to other things. We can move on to other sectors or other zones or whatever it might be. Just because a natural disaster, a hurricane hits, not everything's getting fixed at the same time.
Sure.
I'm sorry, power lines go down. Your independent residential neighborhood is not going to be as important as restoring power to the hospital.
Right.
It's just not. Or whatever community shelter that people are operating out of, or emergency services are being provided, or the stuff that's supporting a cell tower to support communications. It's just not. And I think everybody understands that. We just have to stop pretending like people are too naive to understand it.
Yeah, I think people can be receptive to some tough medicine. Now, there's a line to that, I'm sure. So, priority aside, what actual actions, like what needs to change? What do we need to do to improve resilience, cyber or otherwise?
Well, I think some of it's long-term planning on things like spares. We don't have a tremendous amount of spare infrastructure. Procuring and maintaining spares. I think we've definitely got to look at our vulnerabilities within the supply chain. Both technical risk within the supply chain, but also going back to COVID, looking at the potential for supply chain disruptions and where our dependencies are there. And some of that I think is going to be rehoming manufacturing back within the U.S. So we've got more ability inside the nation to be able to sustain some of these activities, but also just looking at if I've got that single person who makes the single stopper and the single syringe that's going to be supporting all of these things. Well, okay, I need to go have a conversation with that person and make sure they know that everybody in industry is relying on this one thing. I've kind of wandered all over the place with this one, but it's
a big problem to solve.
Well, so I think there's many different elements we need to go about with that. Some of it is making sure that we're having this extended conversation between physical folks and cyber folks, between the OT and the ICS community and the traditional IT community, to be able to have that sort of shared risk understanding. And I think out of those conversations and out of that understanding, being able to say, okay, I've identified that power company, whatever, is our critical node within this zone. Now, out of power company, whatever, what are my critical elements within that node, within this zone, that I really need to be able to shore up? And a lot of that's going to require on sector-specific expertise, and some of it's just going to require again, prioritization of resources.
So having been in leadership in a couple of government agencies like DOE, are they having these types of conversations? Is this happening?
Yeah, I think the conversations are happening. Yeah, I think as we see more and more elements of the leadership team on the government side continue to come back together, I think the conversation is going to happen even more.
But is there awareness of the problem where we're deficient in cybersecurity and we're vulnerable? Or is that awareness building the way it should?
Yeah, I mean, I think folks in government recognize this as a problem. Whether it's people in the SRMAs and the sector risk management agencies, or it's people on the National Security Council staff, or in the National Cyber Director's office, or wherever. Pick your place. There's awareness that this is a problem, but somebody has to be willing to say, this is where we're going to focus. Stop focusing on all this other stuff. We have a tendency to get distracted and think that we can accomplish a lot more than we can accomplish. When I first, I can't remember if it was a CIO job or my first CISO job that I took. I had a mentor, provide me with some guidance to say, okay, go into this job, take 30 days, sort of assess where you're at.
Yeah.
He said, pick 2 or 3 things. That's it. That's all you're going to be able to accomplish. You're going to do sort of the day-to-day churn of going to this meeting, talking to this person, engaging in, whatever activity. Pick 2 or 3 big things. And that's it. That's all you're going to be able to accomplish. Mostly because I know that I hop all over the place because I feel like it keeps me sharper to change jobs and make sure I'm continuing to expose myself to lots of different things. But you're not going to be able to accomplish as much as you really think that you're going to be able to.
It's a demotivating thing to hear because I've heard the same before. I'm leading my company for the first time as the largest team I've ever led. But prior to this, I had very small team leadership stuff. So I wasn't dealing with a lot of these sorts of issues. And I found as our company has grown, we used to be able to tackle lots of problems very quickly.
Yeah.
Very agile, quick to move. And I like to think we're still pretty agile, but we've had failures, maybe not the right term, but we've had very aggressive goals and then we've not met them. And in hindsight, we're like, wait, we set 8 different big goals and we didn't achieve any of them. We moved them all about 50% of the way.
Yeah.
Now we've started to come, I think, into our own a bit to say, okay, let's maybe tighten this up. You pick 3 or 4. You focus that. You work those until they're where you need them. And now you can go look at other things. But I'm kind of like you were, I like to jump around and I like to throw myself at all kinds of different interesting problems. But I like to also take a shotgun to things and be like, oh, these are all the problems I've identified. Here's how we're going to fix them all. One big plan, go. Yeah. That's not how that can work.
Yeah. And that was exactly my typical default was here are all the things. Here is a goal associated with all of these different things that we need to fix. And here's my sub elements, and here's my sub goals, and here's my timelines I want to hit and everything. It's just, and at some point, you got to realize I'm just not going to be able to do it. It's not going to happen. And I think a lot of it is we have a lot of people who have difficulty separating what's urgent from what's important and allowing sort of process to drive our decision making rather than making decisions and then using the process to accomplish the decisions. And a lot of times we measure our output of daily activity as success. If I say water sector is really important, if I have people that are measuring success by how many stakeholders within the water sector they've met with, or how many advisories that we've posted, or how many summits that we've led, or whatever else, great. You're building relationships, you're continuing to educate, you're continuing to bring the community together. All those things are fantastic. What the fuck did you do about it? It's just there's nothing tangible
we move the needle
that you accomplished there. It's just you did a lot of things, you followed a lot of processes. Congratulations. You've done absolutely nothing to contribute to solving the problem. You were really busy though. I bet you sent a lot of emails.
The calendar was full.
That's what I'm saying. That whole calendar slammed full, and you felt like you were so busy and you could never take leave, and your health deteriorated for it, and you accomplished jack. So I think I know I've said it a bunch of times, so I probably sound like a broken record, but it's about ruthlessly prioritizing. I don't care what it is. I don't care what administration it is. I don't care what agency it is. You're not going to be able to accomplish as much as you think you're going to be able to accomplish. So you need to be able to separate out what's important versus what is urgent, and just start to cut out all the stuff that isn't as much as you can. Like statutorily, there's some things you're gonna have to do. If you're on the government side, you're just gonna have to do it. And we have legal limits to how we can accomplish things, sure. But if you're just gonna continue to allow yourself to be sort of driven by this is our bureaucratic process, whether it's within a company or it's within a government agency, you're just gonna continue to drown in I've got lots of tasks and they amounted to absolutely nothing. We've seen it happen like in our company as well. It's if I'm spending all this time identifying business development opportunities and I'm chasing, contract looks and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And okay, great. You spent all this time researching RFIs for things that Northcom is going to do in this functional area. We don't have anybody working at Northcom. We don't know anybody. We don't know anybody at Northcom. Tangentially, maybe we've got some experience doing this, but you spend a lot of time saying, well, this is an expansion opportunity for us. This is a market that we can expand to because we're not at Northcom, but we're over here doing this other thing in Colorado Springs. And I know somebody who's doing that. You've distracted yourself from what's important. You've distracted yourself from this core mission. But yeah, you showed up at some business development gate review with a lot of information and a lot of stuff you've done. And it's just not going to amount to anything.
Are these lessons you take or have learned after transitioning into more private sector, or is this a blend? Because I'm curious, having always been in private sector, fairly long time government adjacent, but never inside the government. Yeah. I wonder what changes about leading and making decisions when you're a government decision maker and private sector.
I don't think there's that much difference, to be honest. I mean, everybody's operating within a budget. If I've got a BD budget for that year, that is what it is. If I've got a budget for research and development to solve whatever problem it is when I'm in a government agency, that's my budget. It is what it is. So I think there's a lot more similarity than there are differences. I think my own way of approaching this has really just been built off of my own failures.
It's a great teacher.
It sure is. It's sometimes a painful one, but it's a really good teacher. Because I would try to take on too much, or I would oversubscribe myself, or I would not give my team as clear a communication as I could have to help make sure that they understand the priorities, and not just making sure they understand the priorities, but making sure why they're priorities, because I want them to be able to independently lead without coming back to me and saying, well, you said this is the priority, but I really don't understand the underlying logic. So I can't apply that and make decisions on your behalf as a leader within the organization. So those types of failures, I think, have led me to this. I don't think there's that much difference between the private sector and the government.
That's good. It's good to hear, because sometimes I feel like people can be pretty disconnected, or sometimes I feel like government has a different reality. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, especially I interact with a lot of people in like DoD leadership, specifically in like acquisition sustainment, because I'm in the CMMC space and defense industry compliance and cybersecurity. And sometimes they'll just say things that to them was like a hand wave comment. They're like, yeah, obviously, like you guys can all do this. I'm like, you guys are so far removed from the reality of all these small companies that don't just have the budget sitting there to accomplish what you just hand waved. Like, sure, Lockheed can do it, Raytheon can do it. You're hand waving at them, but they're $1 billion companies. Yep. The majority of your industrial base is not that.
Yep. Well, I think it's there is definitely a reality gap between government and the private sector. And there's very, very different experiences between those two populations of people. But I think how you accomplish things is remarkably similar. And I think it's more so true inside of a large business and government than it is to say there's a lot of similarity between small business or startup and government. Because I think when you're in a large business or when you're in a government agency, a lot of things just sort of run off of tribal folklore. Yeah. It's, well, you can't do this because of this reason, or you can't procure things that way because the FAR and the DFAR won't allow for it. Okay, cool. Show me show me in writing. Like, show me in writing where it says that we can't. Oh, it's you feel like it's risky, so you feel like you can't do it. Well, great. I don't care about that. Like, we're making a decision. We're moving quickly. I am either the decision owner, or this leader is a decision owner or the risk owner. They've decided to move forward. As long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, what in the world are you getting tied up in knots about because we're busting some sort of process that's just been passed down from generation to generation for how things need to get done? And like I said, I think that's probably a lot more pervasive in a place like a Lockheed or a Raytheon, because they've had so many different permutations of existence in different companies that were being acquired and pulled together, and processes and procedures that they had to pull together. A lot of times within smaller businesses, you're only building out those policies and procedures and putting them on paper if something like a CMMC or a CMMI or an ISO cert or whatever else is driving you to do those things. And so, again, I just don't think there's that much difference. I think people that say that there's a huge chasm of difference are people who are looking at that as an excuse for why things can't happen quickly enough. There are absolutely roadblocks when you're in government. You can have a contracting officer who really feels a certain way and does not view things the same way that the requirement owner views it. Or you can have a lawyer who thinks that they're a policymaker and can't help find a way to yes, but is instead saying, I don't feel like this is a worthwhile endeavor, or I don't agree with accepting this risk, so I'm just going to continue to advocate for my own position. So there are absolutely blockers that exist. But if you've given the right charge as a leader to people within your organization, you've got them all sort of moving in the same direction, understanding the end state you're trying to achieve, you shouldn't have those sorts of problems.
Yeah, I think that's a key point of similarity, because I think those are just maxims of leadership. Some that I'm, in my own personal development, learning as our company is growing. I'm recently been paying a lot more attention to how we communicate the mission, how we communicate the strategy, where a lot of it has been intrinsic and inherent. And because it's been a small company and I've kind of been everywhere, I haven't had to communicate my vision all that strongly. I just have been able to influence things directly by coordinating over here, there, and everywhere else. As we're growing, I'm finding out how way more important it is to communicate that, and how easy it is to break, a couple tiers removed from me, and all of a sudden people are like, hey, I'm here, I'm showing up to work. I don't really know what I'm working on, or I don't really know what it is we're trying to accomplish. I'm actively in the middle of this problem set with our company of trying to figure out, because we've been polling our staff and sending out surveys and whatnot, and we do kind of get some consistent feedback that people don't really understand exactly what our next move is. Mm-hmm. They know we're growing, they know the values of the company, but they're not really sure, like, okay, what's next? What are we targeting? Where are we trying to grow? Yeah. What's the next thing that we're doing as a big campaign to unlock the next level for us? I have that in my head, and I'm like, wait, you guys don't know that? I thought I said that. But we have to put more of a process in place to make it actually get out to them.
Yeah. That's something I struggle with everywhere I go, because I'll get caught up in my own head and go, well, I've got all these different experiences in these different places that naturally lead me to this conclusion of, why wouldn't we be going and doing that? But I'll struggle to communicate that a lot, especially within a business. This is actually my second time at Invictus. I came here the first time when I left from being the CIO of Navy Intel at the Pentagon. So I left being a senior executive in government, came here the first time, went back and ended up going back into government, being a state CISO and, White House and then energy. And now I've been back for a little more than, probably coming up on 4 years. The first time I was here, we decided that we were going to engage as a cyber company. And the way that we did that was me and another guy wrote an entire technical proposal and just said, here's all the cool stuff that we think that we can do. Here are the great people that we've assembled, and here's how we would solve this problem for you. And they won the contract, and it was great. But that was it. The people that need to have an understanding of how it's going to happen were me, him, and the person who was helping to price it out. That was it.
Right.
Now, we're a bigger organization, and I will consistently forget to stop and communicate with people to make sure they understand the bigger picture, or even just to understand like the cool stuff that people to their left and right are accomplishing. If I've got an Intel analyst who's sitting over in Omaha, and I've got a CI specialist working here in DC, or I've got a cyber person, working on Fort Belvoir or wherever, they're not necessarily going to know even what their peers within the organization are accomplishing or how this is helping to meet a broader strategic goal. I'm with you. It is absolutely terrible to have to slow yourself down and think about how do I need to communicate this.
But I think a key point in that is like you have to think about it, and that's one of the big lessons for me. Has a lot of what has been my career to date as like I've been an IT tech and a systems engineer and all this, and a lot of that I had a natural predilection for. Like I just naturally have a good way about figuring out systems, and you can get complacent with that. And then you can be like, well, maybe leadership will come naturally to me as well. And I found, no, not necessarily. I've had to be way more purposeful. And again, like I'm actively learning these lessons of, people don't just mind meld with you and understand your intent. You have to communicate that, and you have to communicate that to them where they understand it. I will say one of the things I've particularly found surprising, interesting, and gives me hope and optimism is how many people on our team want to understand the vision and the strategy. People who you would think otherwise are just kind of, they want to just do their job. I've had them ask me like, hey, I want to understand what you mean when you say, this is a strategic need for us. What does that translate to? How do I help move that along? I've had more of those conversations lately. And that excites me because it's helping me relax a little bit to be like, oh my gosh, this can be in their hands and they can do better than I could. I'm just here to sort of like set the tone.
Well, I don't think anybody wants to just be a cog in a machine. I don't think anybody wants to just say, I'm fine sitting over here in ignorance and just continuing to punch this button when the thing comes to me and it's my turn to punch the button. But yeah, it's a real muscle you have to consistently exercise to say, I'm trying to build this into my day-to-day routine where I'm going to get in the habit of making sure that I as a leader have both set the tone and I've clearly communicated what the goals are, and I'm helping people to work through some of those initial decisions as they're getting themselves aligned with the goal, so that ultimately they can continue to go off on their own. It's like you're working out. Maybe you need a spotter for that, or maybe you need somebody telling you, you're not quite doing that thing, that squat right. That's not exercising the muscle group you think. But as you continue to mature and exercise, you can eventually do that on your own. You don't need that person standing right there. Leadership is just the same exact way, and I think it's difficult to stop and slow down and do that. Yeah. And I was a real jerk as an IT guy because I wouldn't stop and explain things to people. I would look at people and go, how in the world do you not understand how to do this? I was exceedingly impatient with people.
This was a common thing in IT.
Yeah, but it led to me also being exceedingly impatient, as a leader as well, and just saying, how do you not see all of these dots that are connected, or how can you not see why we'd want to go, engage with this potential customer or make this investment? Even within the executive team, we have to have those conversations pretty regularly. So that's why we have once a week, we have one time that we set aside just for our senior executive team to just get aligned. Like that's it. Like we're not going through like hardcore updates and what have you been doing on this program? We're just making sure we're all on the same page and we're all aligned and moving in the same direction. And that's all we do for at least one dedicated hour a week, because everybody's just off doing all sorts of different things. If I had looked at a company that did that like 5 years ago, my thought would have been like, that's crazy. That's so inefficient. They have to spend literally an hour every week to realign. Like how's that not at most a monthly thing? Yeah. But now I'm finding out more and more because there's so much going on and everyone's got their own world that they're living in and trying to do. We do functionally the same. Like we meet every week as a executive team. We go over our current strategic points. Just sometimes I feel a little silly putting them up there where I'm like, yeah, I know we beat this to death. But I think it's going to pay off in that we're constantly recontextualizing what we're all doing. This is what the company is focused on and what we're trying to accomplish. Well, if you don't, you're going to have some quarterly meeting or some semi-annual or annual meeting. You're going to go, okay, great. What progress have we made on that goal? And it's going to be absolutely nothing. Right. It's like, well, sorry, I guess we didn't actually prioritize that. And I think on the cyber side, I think that's a lot of the problem we have within our government agencies. It's just there's been a lack of clarity and there's been a lack of communication with each other. Like if I'm energy and I know that telecommunications and finance and water sector and everybody else have all of these different critical dependencies on me, I don't know that I'm having enough conversations to understand what their pain points are. I'm continuing to work day in and day out on making my sector more secure and making it more resilient and engaging with the right stakeholders and bringing the people to the table that need to come to the table. But I'm not necessarily like looking to my left and right and making sure I'm understanding their perspective as well, and making sure that all of these disconnected groups are somehow all moving in the same direction. And that's where I think a CISA has to come into play, or a national cyber director.
To tie it all together.
You need somebody helping to tie it all together. I hate the quarterback analogy, but it is what it is. And I guess it's a decent analogy somewhat. You need somebody who's trying to help pull it all together and say, this is why we're doing what we're doing, and helping to take you out of the day-to-day grind of just continuing to produce.
Yeah. And I think, to tie a bow on that, at least my perspective and my lesson, some of this from a leadership standpoint, has been that role matters. It's not just the people doing the grind day in and out. Because, as a IT knuckle dragger of sorts, like having worked my way up from being on the help desk and whatnot, it does always feel like leadership is so far removed, and you can feel a little indignant. Like, guys, I'm the one cranking out the work here, and you guys are like meeting to talk about strategy. That can feel so unimportant, but it can actually be such a key enabler for making the lives easier for the people that are out doing the work, for making it all actually happen, and for the difference between a company moving 1x versus 10x can be exactly that, about strong strategy and these meetings to make sure everyone's aligned and make sure that we're making realistic goal setting, 1 to 3, not 8 to 10 as we might otherwise. So good. I think you and I both probably learned, as you mentioned, through failure on some of those things. Good lessons to learn nonetheless.
Yeah.
I want to ask about AI. Big topic shift, but I know you're involved in the IC. And AI, every guest that we have on the podcast, we always end up talking about AI because it's like the dominant thing that we're all talking about in IT and security. Set aside quantum, which is maybe second fiddle at this point. I'm curious how AI, as much as you can talk about it, is being seen in the IC, and what applications we can expect of AI in intelligence gathering and maybe more offensive intelligence capabilities we might be fielding.
Well, I think it's that's a lot of different ways to take that. So
yeah.
I think you look at the natural evolution of the IC. I look at places like NRO and NGA, the National Reconnaissance Office and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. If we had looked 20 to 30 years ago and said, I think commercial GEOINT and commercial SATCOM capabilities are going to be nearly as good or rival what the government and the intelligence community can provide, I think people would have found that to be an unbelievable and an unreasonable assumption. Now we've got entire agencies that are chartered to be dedicated to that function, an entire parallel private industry segment that is largely doing the same exact type of work. Being able to sort of take advantage of those advancements and being able to go from the GeoInt analysts, the squints, looking at the screen and saying, oh, I think this shape and this outline is a tank, but I think from its placement here and the specific shadow that it's throwing, I don't think that's really a tank. I think that's an inflatable that somebody wants us to think is a tank. I think being able to sort of train artificial intelligence to be able to help take some of the things that humans have traditionally done and free them up to do more advanced tasks, I think that seems to be the thing that the IC is more comfortable with right now.
Yeah. Helping tighten those timelines up to determination.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the inflatable thing, you should know, if you're not familiar, that happened in World War II.
Yep.
We had inflatables, the Allies had inflatables in England to make it look like we were going to cross somewhere different and not land at Normandy.
Yep.
So that's a strategy that has worked.
Yep. It's a real thing. That sort of allow it to partner with me to increase my volume of output seems to be where a lot of people are comfortable right now on the IC side. Where I think we're going to see it going is I think we're going to see it beginning to get us into different mission space areas that we haven't previously been able to pursue, either because of resource constraints or compute, constraints or whatever. But I'll tell you, my worry is that we're going to move further and further away from traditional intelligence disciplines that are really, really important, because we're going to think that technology, or we're going to have some people thinking that technology can help close those gaps and make us more efficient. So then why do we need human intelligence?
Sure.
We need human intelligence for an awful lot of reasons. So like SIGINT's great. If I get some SIGINT intercept, that's fantastic. I probably need some human intelligence to be able to help fact check it, contextualize it for us, any number of things. And I think that that's something that I think we've seen atrophy within the intelligence community the last couple of years has been that sort of human focus.
My confidence would be that the IC of all the different areas of our government and defense infrastructure, the IC would be the one with the most sophisticated view and the most skeptical view of AI, and would be the ones like best equipped to use it properly and effectively for their purposes.
Yeah.
I'm surprised to hear atrophy as a term.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of these like hardcore critical skill sets are things that have atrophied. Like human intelligence officers in the field that have, native speaker level language skills, as an example. That I think is something that has atrophied because we've looked at it and said, well, technology can solve this problem for us. We can pull an intercept and have somebody sitting back here in the national capital region who's going to process that and translate that and analyze that, and out pops intelligence to a field commander. So I think that we have seen some of that atrophy. I think there's some contextualization for things that can't be touched that we have to be really important, as we're considering AI or ML within the intelligence community. Okay, one thing that we saw when I was working with Coast Guard Intel, we were looking at things like counter drug operations and these pangas that were coming up from Mexico down near Southern California. People would, they do you get a radio intercept and they'd be talking about seagulls. Okay, well, are these bird watchers? What are they talking about? Well, it was, seagulls were being used as a code word for Coast Guard helicopters that were going around. So they would see seagulls. If I'm using something that is AI or ML based and it just does that direct translation, I need them to know that the time is inappropriate for them to be talking about seagulls, or the environment is inappropriate for them to be talking about seagulls, or just contextually, it's not right at all.
Right.
Like, I need you to understand they're not talking about seagulls. I needed an analyst to actually be listening to that, and they just know, okay, based off the conversation, based off who this is, I recognize this voice, or I recognize this sort of pattern of life activity to know this type of a group. They're obviously not talking about seagulls.
Yeah, it's having that context that I think this can relate. Think back to like a SOC analyst. We were having a discussion with one of our guests on the podcast recently. We were talking about the cybersecurity field and this need for to fill these like 3 million open jobs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And how there's this disconnect between that, but then also the legions of entry-level people saying, I've applied to 1,000 jobs and I can't get in.
Yep.
There's this profound disconnect. I was talking from our perspective as an employer. We get a lot of these entry-level applicants. They're not what we're looking for. We're looking for, on our SOC,
Yep.
We're looking for experienced people because we want people that have systems context, that understand the normal behavior of a system. Otherwise, how are we going to have them detect and alert and have the context of abnormal? They won't know what they're looking at. And
Yep.
we find some of our best SOC analysts are people who have a sysadmin background who say, hold on, that process shouldn't be creating this child process.
Amen.
Now, if you don't have that context, you end up just having to trust the tool and say, well, the EDR didn't trigger on that, so it's probably okay.
Yeah.
And that's just not going to get us where we need to be.
Yeah. I think everybody working in technology or cybersecurity should have to suffer as a sysadmin or go work on a help desk. It should be like mandatory duty. But I agree with yours. The best people working in a SOC are people that have worked with some sort of technology environment previously, who understand how the technology is being used and how it's employed and what normal looks like.
Right.
So they can appropriately contextualize. I think we see the same sort of challenge, in the workforce that it sounds like you all have seen. And I do feel badly for some of these folks that are just coming into the field and are trying to apply, and they've got a cyber degree from a university. Maybe they've got some cert that they've gone and pursued, or they got an internship under their belt or whatever, and they want to go immediately into being an entry-level SOC analyst. It's kind of like talking about the type of business that we had before. We only hire experienced people. And I know that is probably a really crappy chicken and the egg sort of thing. I need experience to be able to have the experience to be able to apply to this job, and I can't get the experience without getting the job. That's a tough problem that we have to deal with, both as an employer and just looking like more broadly as a community. But having those real world experiences helps to do the things that the machines can't necessarily help you to do. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the IC focus, I believe, because it's such a highly skeptical community anyway. And I see information technology is so jacked. I mean, it's just historically, they have looked at things like shared services as great opportunities to potentially collaborate with each other. But then they have these monstrosity systems that are built for, military intelligence analysis of this flavor, or geoint analysis, or whatever. And they are kludged together, and I came in, I was getting trained on like Sun Solaris systems. Okay. I'm not that old. I should not have been trained on Sun Solaris systems.
Those shouldn't be around anywhere.
No, they never should have been. But these sort of like kludged together environments, though, are just, I think it's going to be a struggle to even be able to normalize the types and the structure of data in order to be able to rigorously and easily apply AI, ML learning to those types of environments. I don't know. We'll see. The IC community is skeptical of everything.
Well, the tech debt that I'm sure has been accumulated in the IC is similar to everywhere, where there's insane amounts of tech debt, old systems that, have been band-aided on band-aids on band-aids on band-aids going way back. You would like to think AI as a tool will be used to solve those situations. Yeah. And, we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of having context and replacing analysts and say, just you feed the signal to the AI and the AI will do the analysis for you. There's a role for it, and it's better at certain things. Machine learning is better, potentially at point in time user behavior analytics and looking at abnormal versus normal for that user and giving you some signal about whether or not that person is doing something that they're authorized to do.
Yep.
But don't take the human out of that equation in entirety, because the machine is always only ever going to be a machine until it's, a general intelligence.
Yeah.
Then all bets are off anyway. It'll be a different world we live in when we have AGI. But in the meantime, I don't like the rush to replace humans in all aspects with AI and say, the AI will take the decision making for you and it'll do the analysis for you. It's just, one, it's not there yet, but two, we are an important part of the equation. The human brain and our way of thinking is still going to, have a major piece to play in all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's ready to pledge allegiance to our robot overlords quite
yet. You should prepare. You should mentally prepare for the eventuality of Skynet.
Yeah, I think that the interesting pieces of that for me are being able to use technology to help you think in a way that's not natural for you, to be able to either examine a different viewpoint or look at data in a different way that's going to expose you to different potential outcomes, just because you're naturally biased to look at things in a certain way. If I'm looking at things, if I've been working as a narcotics officer in a police department for 15 of my 20 years of a law enforcement career, I'm naturally going to look at things through that lens and through that context. Like, it's going to have radically informed my viewpoint about how I'm approaching things as a law enforcement officer. Everybody else has the same exact sort of struggle. So I think being able to use things, sort of broaden how you're looking at potential problems, that's going to be really, really interesting. But I do worry, especially with the IC and other sensitive areas of the government. understanding the provenance of these large language models and the data that was used to train them and where these systems are coming from and how they are being developed is just as important to me as understanding what the possibility is of what they can achieve.
Yeah.
I want to be able to understand if I'm relying on you because you're feeding me a potential outcome or you're analyzing information for me, I want to know why you're analyzing it that way.
Right. Well, I understand the bias that you have.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to think that we have biases in the machine, but yeah, it's the data that they're trained on.
Exactly. It's I think it's gonna be interesting to see how that evolves in the next couple of years. To look at, if nothing else, just the trademark and intellectual property debate that's going to happen around large language models, and people saying, "Oh, this LLM was trained on whatever this copyrighted material was." What is the difference between the rights of the creator of that raw material or that information and the rights of the person who is using that LLM to train? It's gonna be interesting to see how some of that stuff evolves alone.
I think it's going to be profoundly messy.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's gonna. For me, I would love to see the types of amici briefs that are going to make their way to the Supreme Court in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have all these varying opinions, across the judicial system. Ultimately, they're going to have to be resolved at the Supreme Court. I would love to be able to hear the debate back and forth of Supreme Court justices trying to examine, large language models and the training data, and seeing how the law has to kind of be morphed to be interpreted in a certain way to support it. Because there are a lot of gap areas for us there right now. But
it's truly new frontier stuff.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I'd like to be a fly on those walls as well. Just like, because I can see both sides of so many of these things. I like the dissemination of information freely. I'm a big fan of that as a principle, but then I also understand the need to protect intellectual property and whatever else. When I go to an AI model, ChatGPT or whatever else, and I ask it to hey, create me a mock-up of a piece of artwork or whatever else, it's not inventing that. It's looking at what everyone else has done.
Yeah.
And amalgamating that into what it thinks you're asking for and using math to sort of predictively build that out. Somewhere in there's a line of what is appropriate and what's not. If it just slightly changes somebody else's original artwork, has that crossed the line? Is it still the protected IP? How far does it have to go? I don't think any of these are going to be clean lines to be drawn. It'd be very interesting to see, regulatorily, regulation-wise, where we end up.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think it's going to be a lot like the DMCA stuff was, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act stuff was, with the debates of the rights of artists versus the rights of these websites that were out there like Napster and whatever else, streaming music out there for free. We have to have that same sort of watershed legislation and watershed determination by the courts when it comes to AI, ML, and these large language models.
It seems like such a tough cat to put back in the bag.
Yeah.
We couldn't even do it with torrenting and downloading. I mean, that as much as they tried, that's very easily beaten, all of that sort of stuff. And AI is going to be way more powerful.
Yeah.
And way more capable.
Yeah. I guess we'll see over the next couple of years, I suppose. I mean, this is part of the problem. How do you determine, if you're trying to apply decades old law, like intellectual property law, if you're trying to apply that to something like AI, it would not have been possible to conceive that a legislator or a staffer or anybody else would have possibly needed to consider this type of application when they were drafting intellectual property law, or that any court would have needed to kind of take it into account when they were interpreting that law and looking at legislative intent. This is just going to be square peg, round hole for God knows how long.
Yeah, and I don't, maybe this would be a pessimistic view on that when it comes to the regulatory environment and our lawmakers' ability to adapt.
Yeah,
they just seem so far behind that I don't have a lot of hope that they'll catch up to properly handle it. But like most things, I think it'll work out in the end. Do you have an optimistic take on AI, or do you have more of the sky is falling, Skynet's coming sort of a take?
I don't have an optimistic view on many things, but
you're like the way I end this podcast. because I always like to end on a note of optimism. But before we get to that, AI. AI is this emerging total change to the world. So so it's being described as, and I can see some elements of that. That can come with a lot of turmoil, and it can empower a lot of bad things. But I also think it can do a lot of good. I may be still kind of undecided on where I think it's going to take us.
I just think that there's so many undetermined things right now, and there's so many unanswered questions about, like we were just talking about the legal implications of it, but about the moral or ethical implications of some of these uses of AI. I just don't think society has wrestled with a lot of that. So I have a pessimistic view of the things we're going to have to go through before we resolve those types of things and come to a common understanding of what we believe is okay and what we don't think is okay. I mean, the technical front, it's going to continue to evolve. It's going to continue to get better. Fantastic. I think that as people continue to take advantage of it and continue to learn how to take advantage of it, it's going to be a great force multiplier for some people. I think it's also going to change the types of things that we have to do to evaluate what is of quality and what isn't. I mean, we on the business side, we responded to a proposal a couple months ago, and there was a disclosure by the government in the evaluation factors that said our proposal was going to be evaluated using AI ML tools, and it said possible tools that could be used would be whatever. And they gave us a list of a couple different tools. It's just going to change the way that people are doing business. But then I do worry, okay, well, is that just going to become the only check? Or is there going to be some functionality within that tool one day that is going to say, this is an outstanding proposal versus an acceptable proposal, and it's never even going to get a human's eyes on it? I do worry about some of that.
What's going to be fun there is the amount of tools I'm seeing come out for RFP responses through AI. You're going to write a proposal in AI. It's going to be ingested by an AI that's going to read it. I've also had clients whose government customer has said, if you reply to us with a proposal or reply to the RFI and you've used AI, we want you to identify the specific areas of your proposal that have been, generated by AI.
Yeah.
Turns into a whole thing where we're just kind of AIs talking to each other. And the question is, where is that human going to come into any of it?
Yeah. I mean, truthfully, some of the stuff I've done with the Hill just in the last couple of months, I saw that on a questionnaire that came back with, the last question was, tell us if you've used AI. I can't remember the exact verbiage, to draft this, to edit it, to format it, to whatever. They wanted to know if you'd used any sort of AI tool associated with it to help with that. And I consistently cheat by doing that, by saying, okay, look, I write stream of consciousness, and I can sound like a crazy person. Format this for clarity. That's the consistent 100% ChatGPT prompt for me, or Grok prompt for me is, format this for clarity. But
have you developed this? I noticed this the other day. I loosely accused somebody of using ChatGPT, just the way they structured it and had the M dash.
Yeah.
Like, that's prolific now. And I was like, all right, I'm not mad if this was ChatGPT, but I just want to know for my clarity, was it? And they're like, no, I wrote that. I'm seeing that lens everywhere now. I'm reading everything from like marketing emails I get to copywriting to email communications with customer service and everything. I just see it everywhere. I'm like, is that an AI? And it's starting to, like, I feel like maybe I got the tin hat on, where I'm like, is the internet real, or is it all just bots now? Is it all just going to be AI at some point?
Yeah, I think I think it's sort of like it's sort of like pilots. You want a pilot to be trained for worst case scenarios.
That's a good way to put it.
I want my pilot to know if there's an engine failure, what is it they're supposed to do? Or if I'm in a helicopter and they're in an uncontrolled free fall, how do they restart their engine quickly and, move on? I do worry what skills or what knowledge are we going to have that atrophy naturally with people because we start to become reliant on things like this. It's just, I imagine people would say the same thing about, you couldn't do math quickly in your head because you became overly reliant on a calculator, whatever. I mean, you're going to have the debate no matter what the technology is.
Yeah.
But how much of what we've done, especially on like the liberal arts side of education and more like being creative, what things there are just going to fall to the wayside because somebody's like, well,
Yeah.
Why do I need to do this? You need me to know how to write this sort of this paper to be able to prove that I can write in a way that is clear and can articulate an argument in a reasonable way. Why do I need to do that?
Yeah.
I can give ChatGPT or Grok or whatever my
That's a
5 bullet points and say,
big
make an
point.
argument from this perspective. Why do I need to do that? So I think there's just sort of baseline expectations of humans that we have right now that I think are going to change in a really big way.
Yeah. That in particular, that just sort of like struck me, the liberal arts side of things, the temptation to let that atrophy is going to be so strong.
Yep. Yeah, because why do I need it?
It's like we're going to regress into like less sophisticated ways of communicating.
Yeah, I mean,
you're just not going to need that skill.
Well, it's going to be idiocracy. It's worst case scenario.
Right.
It's just you look at it and people if you see the slow devolving of knowledge, like, well, somebody forgot that the plants need water. Okay, well, there are things we take for granted now that everybody has kind of a common baseline of education and a common baseline of understanding and a common baseline of how you do XYZ. At some point, those things are going to start to fall off. People are going to start to forget about them because it's not going to be relevant, and that I can do this a lot faster if I just use this tool.
Yeah. Well, that remarkably potentially pessimistic. No, that's not how we ever end our podcast. We always end on notes of optimism. My final question is always, against this backdrop of challenges that we face in the national security sector, the cybersecurity sector, many of the things we've talked about, emerging things like AI, but the lack of regulatory confidence in Capitol Hill, and just all these different challenges can make you cynical and paint a picture of pessimism. But I think in everyone who's willing to take on challenges like this and not just throw in the towel, there's a thread that you could pull through of optimism. Yeah. I always like to know, where do you find optimism? What grounds you in optimism enough that you're like, hey, I'm still going to apply myself to these problems?
I think if you just look at you look at the tone and tenor that some of our leaders in the national security space are starting to come through and how they're articulating their vision or their expectation, like what these government agencies should be doing. I think it shows me that there's a tremendous opportunity. There's a tremendous appetite for ruthlessly prioritizing, for looking at it and saying, look, we've gotten off topic. We've gotten out of focus for what we were supposed to be doing. We can disagree about what the focus should be for this agency or this division or subdivision or component or whatever, but getting them laser focused on this thing and accomplishing these 3 things. This is the most important thing, and this is what we're going to focus on. And once we solve that problem, sure, we can go look at other things. But we've drifted into doing so many other things additionally that just aren't the core mission focus, that it's made it where we're less effective overall. So that's a point of optimism for me, is just seeing that there seem to be leaders that are willing to engage in that ruthless prioritization. We can argue all day long back and forth about what the priorities should be, but being willing to do that, being willing to engage in that sort of a way and make tough decisions to provide really strong focus, I think that's incredibly important. And that is encouraging to me.
All right. Well, Nick, we appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you? LinkedIn?
Well, when I'm not spouting pessimistic views about everything technology, on LinkedIn as Nick Andersen, spelled S-E-N, of course, because I have to make things difficult. But we can always go to our website for our company is invictusic.com, and we've got not just me, but a whole litany of great leaders that are doing awesome things and showcasing some of the technology we're working with.
Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Watchers. For more great content, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our channel. We'll see you on the next one.